I am delighted to welcome Carrie Spell-Hansson. In today's session, we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion. Carrie, I am delighted that we're having this conversation. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And Maureen, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about something I'm passionate about it, and it's so near and dear to my heart.
How are you defining diversity and inclusion?
If we go back to President Truman, his executive order back in 1948, he talked at that point, it was really about how do we actually break some of the barriers so that we would have people that were at that point marginalized. And back in 1948, it was primarily African Americans, or people of African descent, I should say. And so at that point, it was just basically how do we get people through the door? How do we change some of what the landscape looked like? So I would say at this point, the universe of diversity has changed. You go back to the point where we talked about how do we tolerate people that look different from us. And so now we're at a place where we're talking about not only that, but also including. How do we include people? How do people start to feel like they're a part of the organization or just society as a whole? When I define diversity, I look at all aspects. There was not even a conversation back in 1948 about sexual orientation, sexual preference, or gender, whereas now that's a very important component of it, or women in the workplace. I would say that we've expanded how we define diversity at this point in the 21st century.
What have we learned in 70 years of diversity initiatives?
I would say personally what I've learned is that the whole concept of the idea of tolerating differences is unacceptable. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when I'm teaching diversity and inclusion, one of the things that I ask the participants is I invite them to go home and share with their loved ones, their partner, or any other loved one, and just say to them, "Hi, honey, I tolerate you." And when you return tomorrow, tell me how that goes over. And what I mean by that is who wants to be tolerated? Okay, I want to be accepted for who I am. And everyone, regardless of how different they might be, it's really about acceptance. At this point, one of the biggest differences is that I'm certainly not teaching tolerance, I'm teaching acceptance. You don't have to agree with each religion or nationality or whatever, but I can accept the differences.
What we're learning in a time of disruption is differences are required. So I don't just tolerate them. I have to integrate people who think differently, who look differently, who believe differently, who have different political orientations, because they come to those places from different thinking, different experiences, and those differences are the only way we're going to create robust solutions to the challenges we're facing.
Exactly. When you think about it from the perspective of if we all thought the same, there would be very little progress. If you have a different way of thinking, a different way of viewing the world, when we're looking at a problem, we're going to have a variety of opportunities to look at and explore different solutions. We're seeing that in the workplace now. When there is diverse teams within the organizations, the productivity is much higher. So we know that the difference makes a difference. And the willingness to accept that other people might see a problem from a different perspective, and my willingness to be open to hearing what they have to say will certainly support us in finding different types of solutions.
I absolutely agree. And yet we saw some research about people's willingness to follow leaders who are different. And it was, to me, surprisingly low. So people accepting a person of a different gender and willing to truly follow them was around half. People's willingness to follow someone of a different political leaning was about a third. While we think it's imperative, that's where I think the work of inclusion really comes in, that if I won't follow someone who has a different political view, our entire workforce is in trouble.
Yes, absolutely. I haven't seen the most recent research that you're speaking about, and I can say to you, though, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised to hear that, because one of the things that I also do is I look at the neuroscience of inclusion, which is understanding how our brain works. So if we take this all the way back to prehistoric days based on what we've learned through history, then we would know that one of the things that as human beings, our brains are wired to be more acceptance of people that are just like us. So what happens now, we're talking thousands of years later, so what are we doing? Our brains are basically wired so that if someone walks into the room or if there's a leader that looks like me, I am going to be more acceptance of that individual without even them having a conversation with them. Mm-hmm. My brain is wired if someone walks into the room that's different from me, that I go into alert, like danger, be on guard. That's been since that's part of us, and then it's only perpetuated in a society where the news media continues to reinforce. Yeah. Okay, and not blaming overall, just talking news media is bad. That's not what I'm saying, because it's systemic. It's in our culture. Okay, whether it's marketing, whether it's the news media, those are the things, and I'm beginning to notice how that is changing. So the evolution of changing how we present people that look different from us will support us in seeing people differently. And then I would also say we have to be willing and open to the change.
The other is the change in Google algorithms. I can now, no matter what my perspective is, go find my people. Now, when I open my phone, I've got something in my news feed that reinforces my point of view, and it then distances me from people who look at the world differently, irrespective of their physical features. Right. It seems like we are now, as a society, moving toward more polarization because of the way information is served up to us as well.
We have access to more information than we did, obviously, even 5 years ago, so let alone 50, 60, 70 years ago. You know, you hear a lot of conversation now about biases, and what you're speaking of is what we would call confirmation bias. And a confirmation bias is like, whatever I believe is the truth, I can find evidence to support that truth. And as a result of that, I can stay in that space of my way of thinking and my way of viewing the world is truth, and I can validate that. Those of us that are actually doing the work of diversity and inclusion in organizations and communities and just throughout the world, one of the things that I always say to people is that what I teach is a process of unlearning. As adults, we have to give ourselves permission to want to unlearn. It's difficult and I would say impossible to teach someone if they are so set in their ways that that's all that they can see. I can appreciate and understand that we were shaped and molded in an environment and how we grew up and where we grew up, that is how we see the world. As an adult, we can make different choices if we want to. We can decide that, yes, this is how I see the world. I'm open to hearing other ways of doing and other ways of being, and that's the unlearning process. And also understanding that my brain is wired like that. My brain is wired to see that. And according to the research, when you look at the neuroscience of inclusion, it's going to take us many, many, many years to get to a place where the brain is wired differently. First of all, I'm an eternal optimist. So I believe that we're on our way.
So initially, then I make conscious choices that may conflict with my innate wiring.
Yes.
I am a woman who's 5'3". I'm probably wired to be afraid of 7-foot-tall men because I'm small. I can make a choice to be not consciously afraid of them. And then over time, my brain will rewire.
Yes, yes.
But initially, I have to be very deliberate when I walk into a room with tall men. But it could take me a very long time to be not afraid.
Yes, absolutely. And part of that is with respect to our biases. One is acknowledging that we all have it. I believe it's in Wikipedia. I think they've counted something like 158,000 biases and still counting. It makes it sound like every other thought is a bias, about someone else. What you do is you challenge those conversations that you're having in your head and ask yourself the question, when was the last time I saw a male that was 7 foot tall and I was in danger? So we start to question that, but you're absolutely right. The other part of it is, I used to say years ago, I've been doing diversity and inclusion work since we started talking about affirmative actions nearly 30 years ago. I would teach that it was really about the journey. It was not the destination. Okay, so don't focus on the destination, but focus on the journey. I have to tell you, Maureen, a couple of years ago, I came to the realization that it's not even about the journey or the destination. The journey is the destination. There's no place to get to. We're going to spend the rest of our lives working on this. But I don't believe that it will happen completely in my lifetime.
Think about how our brains get wired the way they are. I never leave the house without clothing. My brain is absolutely wired that would be embarrassing.
Yes, yes.
If not illegal, it would really be embarrassing. And I can be exhausted. I can be almost sleepwalking. I've walked out of the house without rinsing my hair, any number of other things. But clothing is always on. My brain is equally as wired to keep me safe around seeing people that are different. And so it's going to take a long time to rewire. And I may rewire about color, but not about the economic differences.
Sure.
Or I may rewire about LGBT, but not people of different statures. So it is, as you say, really an unlearning that requires conscious effort.
Yes, absolutely. And when you think about what will support us in the unlearning process is the media, television shows. I rarely have time to watch TV. My schedule's like nonstop. And I mean, I'm passionate about it. And I will watch because I'm also observing the shift, like in some of the comedies that we see. Last night I was working and I turned the TV on and Will and Grace was on. So again, looking at it's okay to have an openly gay person and speaking about it and being married to another man. And when I was growing up, that was like unheard of. In fact, when I was growing up, one of the things I remember is that even married people slept in separate beds on something like Leave It to Beaver. And ironically, there was another show, The Brady Bunch, and I was watching a talk show a couple of years ago, and one of the things they said, if you ever noticed when they were in the bathroom, that they weren't even allowed to show you a toilet. Okay, that was unacceptable. During that time, that was like totally disrespectful. You would never show a bathroom with a toilet. And look how far we've come. So we are now teaching from a different perspective. Growing up, I did not see people on TV that looked like me. Now I turned the TV on here last night at the hotel, and yet I see so much diversity and interracial couples and things like that. So the rewiring is taking place subconsciously for us as well. And of course, what we have to do when I think of like maybe having the power to wave a magic wand. And if I was able to do that, I would, in addition to continue in making organizations and corporations aware of the fact that when they are showing a bias or substantiating the fact that we should think separately as opposed to more inclusive, we point those things out to them. The other part of it is our school system, our education process, because this is really a process of education. That's also rewiring the brain. Think about it, if you didn't know how to read or write, what would happen to you as you fast forward and become an adult and how you interact with other people? So if we're teaching children how to read or write, what if we're teaching them that differences is okay?
And to your point, the media is in many cases ahead of the curve. If I think about TV shows that I've watched, they do have people of different ethnicities in key roles.
Yes.
That seems important as well, that the boss is a man of color. It's not always the white dude.
Yes, exactly.
I remember reading in the literature about implicit bias that just seeing people in roles that look like each of us gives us permission that it's okay to be there.
Yes, yes. And think about it, as children are watching some of these shows, whether it's a Sesame Street, or if they see other children that looks like them, or if they're watching a show where the woman is about to fly into space. Okay, she's an astronaut. What is that telling me when I'm 7, 8, or 9 years old? I can be an astronaut if I want to. If I'm watching a show where there's a woman president, okay, I can say, well, you know what? I can aspire to do that. We didn't have that for many, many years. So that to me is part of the whole process of rewiring. Or when we see people that look different on TV and we see that they're interacting, subconsciously our brain is saying, oh, well, maybe those people, quote unquote, are not that bad.
Back to your magic wand, some of the biases children of today have will be different than what we grew up with.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, my granddaughter actually said to her brother when he started school, in actually kindergarten, and I heard her in her room sharing with him that some people in your class will have 2 mommies, and some people will have 2 dads. She said, well, we have a mommy and a dad. She goes, but there are all different kinds of ways to have mommies and dads. And I thought, wow, that's profound. You know, what is that doing? That in and of itself is shifting the way they're growing up. Another good example are seatbelts. But, you know, think about how long it took for us to realize that seatbelts was. It's like now it's like, for lack of a better way of saying, it's a no-brainer now.
Yeah.
When I get in the car, I don't think, oh, let me put the seatbelt on. It's like brushing my teeth. I get in the car, I put the seatbelt on.
That's when we know we've rewired.
Exactly.
Right? I don't have to consciously say, when was the last time I was disadvantaged by a man a foot and a half taller than me?
Yes, exactly.
Initially, I need to be conscious.
Exactly.
Because being unconscious gets me bias.
Absolutely. And I always say, as adults, no one can make us do anything. So we have to be willing to give ourselves permission.
And I would say even more than permission, I have to challenge myself.
Absolutely.
It is not okay for me to be biased just because I'm unaware.
Yes.
I have to, as a citizen in this period of time, when we interact with people of difference, as often as we interact with people of similarity, and that disruption requires it. It is required for those of us who are ethical, principled, moving our world forward to be conscious first so that we can be unconsciously competent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is the way the world existed during prehistoric times, when you think about it, people actually were together in tribes. They did not interact with other tribes. When they had to pick up and move from one location to another because they had exhausted the land, and it may have been hundreds of years. When they did that, as they begin to set up in the new area, they always had people that were watching out for, for danger, animals, other tribes, whatever. When they saw a tribe coming across the mountain, they didn't stand up and go, oh, look, here comes diversity, let's embrace them. That's not what they did. They fought.
At least they stood back and questioned.
Yes, exactly. It was like an automatic, like an alarm, because they didn't know what to expect. So when you think about it from that perspective, we now live in a world where we're moving all over. We're not settling in a tribe or in a group or in a particular country. We are moving all over. And because we have the ability to do that, because of work, because of people are falling in love with people from other parts of the world, whatever. We're so now integrated, if you will, that it is a requirement that we learn how to interact and survive together for the benefit of our planet, for the benefit of living a successful life or a wonderful life. So how do we do that? How do we make that happen? And it's not going to change. It's not going to go away, is what I say. We're not going to change that.
And I love the idea that being aware that in the past, in a tribal era, difference meant danger. And I had to at least pay attention. Are they safe? Yes. Now you can't go into fetal position every time you get off an airplane in a different place. Now safety equals embracing diversity. It's completely flipped how our brain sees the world.
Hence the whole idea of rewiring the brain now. We're no longer looking at it from that perspective. So how do we do that? How do we begin to think from the place of, like you said, that willingness to open my eyes and challenging some of my way of thinking? Am I willing to challenge that? And acknowledging the fact that, yes, I do have the biases, but there's more than one way to be right.
Why don't you share a little bit about what you're doing and what you're learning?
Well, I do a lot of work with women. And so my dissertation that I'm currently writing is looking at women in leadership positions and how do women thrive in the face of lack of respect. Now, there's a tremendous amount of research obviously being done as it relates to women in the workplace and women actually evolving, if you will. There's a class that I teach and I always share with women leaders or potential leaders is that they have to give themselves permission to step into their greatness. What I'm learning is that there's a lot of work being done and a lot of research on some of the external factors that have to change, some of the systemic issues that we're dealing with in our world that keep women suppressed, or oppressed. What I'm looking at and what I'm studying in my research, what are some of the intrinsic things? How can we develop training and programs to support women internally, self-esteem, self-confidence? And that becomes such an important component. And I don't want to negate the fact that looking at some of the external factors, like the systemic biases and racism and sexism, but I also want to look at some of those internal factors, and that's what my focus is on. So my research is actually interviewing women and asking them about these experiences, because what I want to do is I'd like to be able to see, I want to find if there's a trend. Is it resiliency? Is it, what are some of the things? And a lot of it is also looking at the way we've been socialized.
I do a lot of executive coaching, often with women. What are a couple of the things that you're finding that we can share with our listeners? What would you advise me and other women that we can change how we think about ourselves so we can be more effective?
Well, it's interesting. It goes back to the socialization process. Okay. So then our brains become actually wired in terms of what is acceptable to us, in terms of our confidence or lack of self-confidence. The media, we go back to the media, and I don't want to sound like I'm blaming media for anything, but it's also part of our socialization and our learning process. And what we see, whether it's the dolls that we play with, or the games that we play. So when we're in school, when we're in a class in the second or third grade, and we're told, and we watch the boys, and they were told that they're good in math, and we get something wrong, and the teacher tells us to just sit down and try it again, but yet she coaches the boys in terms of how to do it correctly, unconsciously. Because again, if you're taught that girls are not good in math from the time you're very young, and if you decide that you want to become a calculus teacher or professor of math or something, and you're told at a very early age, well, you can't do that because girls don't do that. Okay, so then what do you grow up with this idea of like, I'm not good enough or I can't? Or when you're taught that you have to look a certain way as a woman, you have to dress a certain way, you have to be a certain weight, you have to do all of that. And how are you taught that? By what you see in the magazines. So of course we're changing that as well.
Yet you and I are both sitting here as very successful women. What changed for you that allowed you to get past the socialization?
It's the process of unlearning. It's acknowledging and recognizing and also challenging some of the things that you know internally does not feel right. And we talk about affirmations, our ability to listen to those conversations, because we all talk to ourselves. That's part of being human. So how do I begin to negate that negative self-talk? That's huge, because if I'm having a conversation with myself, I'm on my way to have an interview with you. And so if I'm saying to myself, oh my goodness, I'm going to mess this up. And how often do we say things like that? Oh, I'm so bad at, I'm such a lousy whatever. So how do we begin to change that? Sometimes I'll say that in a class with women, it's like, when is the last time you looked in the mirror and said that you were beautiful? When do you look at yourself and go, wow, I love myself just the way I am? And one of my most favorite ones is that when I say to people, this is not your practice body. Wait until I get my real body and watch how fabulous I'm going to look. You know what I'm saying? This is it. How do I appreciate it? Yes, we have so many different ways that we can do things. We could change our hair color. We can make it long. We can make it short. We can gain weight. We can lose weight. We could do lots. We could have plastic surgery. But the body that I'm currently in, can I embrace it and love it? Is really what it comes down to. So how do we start with that and become more self-accepting? Okay, as opposed to projecting, and if I make this other person happy and make other people happy, therefore I'm going to be happy. It's an inside job first.
Well, and thank you. And again, we can all point outside and blame, but there are a lot of us who are successful despite the things we've experienced, or maybe because of them, maybe because of the adversity.
Yes, and I would say because of. Oftentimes, so one of the things I'm looking at in my research is, what is it that I can begin to isolate from those women that have the lack of respect, yet thrived?
That's one of the things I wonder. For me, it was, I will not allow that thing to control my life.
Right.
I will do everything that I was told I couldn't, which also caused me to put myself in really stupid spots.
Sure.
But I was going to prove to myself that the things that happened earlier weren't going to shape my life.
Right. That to me is resiliency. I'm fascinated by the whole idea of resilience and resiliency. And we now know that it can be taught. It's not something, well, some people are born with it and some people are not. Some people may have a little bit more of it, but we can teach it. We've isolated it, and we actually train and support women in becoming more resilient. So we can spend our time looking outside and go, we need to change the landscape, and we do. And we can also look inward, which is what I'm doing. And how can we support women in looking inward? And what is it that I can do differently? Because by my doing that, I'm going to change the landscape as well.
Just like I don't need to be skinnier and prettier, I don't need the outside landscape to change before I can take control of my life.
Absolutely. I'm giving myself permission to step into my greatness.
And I'm rewiring those, just like I rewire my conversation with myself about 7 feet tall men. I'm rewiring myself about the conversations I have that I'm not good enough to step into the interview.
Absolutely. And being able to do that and recognizing that all of this takes time, it takes energy, and we're talking about skills. If you've ever learned how to ride a bike, or if you exercise, if you work out, it takes discipline. It's awkward initially, and sometimes it's even painful, and we mess up. And, when I fall down, do I get back up? Or do I fall down and go, oh no, I failed, I can't get up anymore? Do I get back up and do it again? Because I know I get better and I get stronger. We were talking about that previously. You know, you might start a new job or something, and you look and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I still go in and out with that with my dissertation. Like, oh my God, this is like overwhelming. I don't know what I'm doing. And it's like, all I have to do is put one foot in front of the other.
You know, there's something about being a beginner, even when we're very experienced. Mm-hmm. My partner has started taking karate classes. Mm-hmm. And so he walked in as a white belt in his late 50s, and he goes through his first testing for his yellow belt. And he said he went through the test and he passed it. And he's in a room with 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds. Yes. And they're doing the fist bump, like, look, old man. and putting himself in a spot where 6-year-olds were more experienced in some cases. Again, it's rewiring that we create that agility in our brains that allows us to stay fresh and new. How do we continue to stay open?
That's the journey. There is no destination. When I get to this, or when I get this PhD next year, or when I do that, I'm done. Well, then it's over. It's like, you know, am I taking my last breath? That's why the journey is the destination. It's like you're constantly on this journey. One of the challenges that I see with people when we look at diversity and inclusion and being open to accepting differences and changing how I view the world is getting off of this, what the way I am is the way I should be, and I cannot change. And it's fear. A lot of it's fear-based. You know, I don't know what's on the other side of my thinking, expanding my awareness and my thinking about people that's different. What's going to happen to me?
I met with one of my financial people recently, and he said people of my age are potentially going to live to be 105. That's 50 years from now. Wow. If I am not changing, and actually that's the thing that would make me more afraid, is if I'm not changing and the world's changing over the next 50 years at an accelerating rate of change, I will be a completely obsolete human being. Right. I am more afraid of that than I am of change.
And that's a perfect example. When you think about it, most people, the fear of change, so how do we get people to a place where we're not making anyone wrong? Your biases and whatnot, I'm not going to make you wrong because you are really a product of how you've been shaped and molded. What I am challenging you to do is be willing to see other possibilities, other ways of thinking.
In that spirit, then, what do you see the best leaders doing that's different?
Acceptance of differences, and not only in language, but in your actions. Being open, being willing to be vulnerable.
I think that's huge. The vulnerability and transparency, letting people know I'm vulnerable.
Absolutely. Because we as human beings, we know when someone is sincere and when someone is being authentic. If you're saying to me, well, you know, I want to become a more inclusive leader, and I don't really believe that, but when I go home, I'm going to say, I don't believe in these people, so on and so forth. I'm going to feel that from you. I may not be able to name it or pinpoint it, but something doesn't work for me, and I'm not going to trust you. So authenticity is really, really important. And in order for leaders to be authentic, they also have to be self-aware.
I think that's really important as well, because I can say something that I think I believe because I have no idea really what I believe.
Yes. The first major step is the self-awareness component. So whether you're talking about emotional intelligence, diversity, inclusion, so on and so forth, you are talking about how aware of you in terms of what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and have you done the work on yourself?
The other thing you talked about, and I want to circle back to that, is as I'm doing the work on myself, I'm going to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
I said something in a keynote the other day, and I got feedback at the end that it came out so differently than I intended. And while I'm embarrassed, going back on stage and apologizing seemed not effective. But I need to continue to be better at what I'm doing. And the embarrassment will keep me from ever saying that thing again.
Yes. And I like that. And as you were speaking, I love analogies. And the thing that comes to my mind is, have you ever noticed there's lots of construction going on all over the country? So have you ever noticed when there's construction, there's usually a sign that says under construction, give them a break.
Yeah.
We're human. Okay. And as human, we are subject to errors. We're subject to saying, what I like to call put foot in mouth.
Yeah.
Okay. We're subject to that. Okay. Are you willing to give me the benefit of the doubt? Are you willing to come to me and tell me? Because intent does not always equal impact.
as long as I'm trying something new, I'm going to make a mistake.
Absolutely.
I will have foot and mouth.
Yes.
And if people come to see me as a speaker, what they don't want is what they got 5 years ago. Because I got really good at that.
Yes.
They want something new. And if it's something new, occasionally, well, always, I will be asking for my listeners to listen with grace.
Exactly.
To extend me forgiveness because my intent is positive.
Absolutely. That's it.
And my words may be occasionally not sound as polished when they come out of my mouth as they did in my head.
Absolutely. And so as a leader, getting back to that, I would say that that's so incredibly important, that we are being authentic. When someone comes back to you and say, well, you said this, and you said, that was not my intent. And it sometimes, if I'm face to face with you, I can tell by your body language that what I said did not land correctly. Allow me to explain to you what my intent was in this situation. And then I tell other folks the onus is also on you to share the impact.
Yeah.
Ask the question. Can you tell me if you meant such and such when you said this? You want to make sure that you're sharing the impact, because that's how we maintain or save our relationship, as opposed to in our heads making decisions about what someone said and what they really meant. And they meant me harm, or it was meant to be negative.
Most of the people with whom I interact don't mean me harm.
Exactly.
And I would assume for most of our listeners, most of the people we interact with are trying to get through the day, feed their kids,
Absolutely.
get from one place to the other. They never have enough time.
Absolutely.
Most of us are overwhelmed much of the time just trying to make sure we're on time for the next thing on our schedule. Yes. I don't mean harm when I'm distracted, worrying about whatever I need to do next. But I may not sound as gracious as I intend to.
Again, that it's a give and take. Relationships are give and take. And our willingness to do that, as opposed to this preconceived notion, when I see you, I automatically have this idea of who you are and what you're thinking and what you're after, and it's from a negative place.
You are in a position to influence the field significantly. What are one of the or two of the things that you really want to see change, or that you would invite our listeners to be thinking about and doing?
One of the things I would like for us to continue educating ourselves, as well as the things that we're putting out, taking a step back, if you will, thinking about how and what we say to each other and respecting differences. For me, changing the field is continuing to teach the process of unlearning to learn.
I talked about being conscious. You talked about being conscious, aware of myself and my thoughts and changing them. Is there anything I'm missing in the how do I unlearn?
How do you unlearn? By being open to other ways of viewing the world and seeing things and seeing people. Again, you're not necessarily agreeing. I think empathy is huge. Okay, I think having empathy and the willingness to see difference. You don't have to agree. You don't have to like what I do. You don't have to like what I eat. But to know that that works for me, that's my process, and giving me the space to do that. And my being able to do the same thing with you is giving you the space to be who you are and just accepting that. And then recognizing, particularly like when we get into a working environment in the workplace, our willingness to recognize that we are creating a third culture. Here's my culture, here's your culture. It's like a Venn diagram. When you put it together, when we overlap, that's the culture that we are working from. My culture here, this is still yours. We're not changing who you are, but our willingness to overlap and find commonality or common ground in order for us to interact.
That it's safe for me to be with people who are different.
Yes.
That difference makes us better. And I will need to continually check myself and remind myself that that difference makes us better, rather than that difference makes me less.
Exactly.
I'm not as smart because I don't know what you know.
You may be smart in one area, and I may be, well-versed and smart in another area. And as leaders, we have to continue to do the work on ourselves, and we have to live by example. Having raised a child, I can tell you, children learn more from what they observe than what you're saying to them. Similarly, in organizations as leaders, or even in communities, your action speaks much louder than the words that you're speaking. So if we're going to say we want you all to get along, show me getting along. If you're saying I want you all to have opportunity to get to the top, then let's not make this like seasoning of the dish and the main dish remains the same. In other words, we can't have everyone in leadership positions that are only white males and saying that I want my organization to be more diverse and inclusive. What am I doing to change the landscape at the top as opposed to talking about it? What am I doing? Do I have succession planning? Do I have it where people are able to see possibility when they come in the organization that they can also become a CEO? Am I a developer of people, all people in my organization?
Because you teach diversity and inclusion programs, what would you advise leaders to do to get the most out of their training?
That they go from training to diversity and inclusion initiative. My dream is that we get to a place where we don't have to have separate diversity and inclusion training. That is part of the management training. It's part of everything that we do. It's part of what we're learning in schools. Okay, if you're taking a course in geology, then you're understanding the dynamics and the difference in different parts of the world because of the different cultures and the different people. Okay, if you're taking a course in finance, that you're understanding that from a class system, that there's some people that you can't go to with financial data. You have to speak to them in a different way for them to understand how to save money and whatnot. So my dream and my vision is that diversity and inclusion becomes part of everything that we do and that we teach, and that we don't have to keep it on as a separate thing that we're doing. So I call it more of a diversity and inclusion initiative as opposed to a training in an organization or in our communities too.
As you say that, I'm thinking of systemically within an organization, it means my culture has to be accepting.
Absolutely.
That we don't tolerate treating people differently.
Absolutely.
And there are consequences for that.
Absolutely.
So performance appraisals are changed. The competencies that I look at for effective leadership has to change. It has to include inclusion, not just to go circle all the way back to where we started. Not just I tolerate you, you're different.
Exactly.
And I put you in the corner and you're the seasoning.
Absolutely.
I worked with a client who put me in the AV closet. They could say, yeah, that was my office. And the person in charge of the organization said, get her out of the closet. And literally, I was working in a closet. Looking back at that, that was a statement about culture.
Yes.
We had the woman in the closet, and the men were along the window row.
And what does that say then about the culture? Not what we're telling people, because our values and our mission statement and everything is perfect. But what do people see when they come into the organization?
You know, what then happened was there was a rumor that I was having sex with the guy in charge. That's why I was out of the closet. We have come a long way from that. I do acknowledge the progress we've made.
Yes.
And the culture matters. The systems matter. Everything we're doing, what's between my ears matters.
It's interesting, and I cannot remember who said this, but there's a quote that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's like that. So again, you can have the best strategies in the world, but if you're not focused on creating an inclusive culture, it's not going to give you all of the things that you're seeking.
Carrie, thank you so much. Your insight is just brilliant. How would someone learn more about you and your work?
My company is the Folke Institute for Transformative Learning. It's www.thefolkeinstitute.com. info@thefolkeinstitute.com would be the best way to get in touch with me. Thank you so much for having me. I've had a blast. I enjoyed talking to you and just sharing and exchanging with you.
Thank you. And same here. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and insight.